Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was one of my most anticipated films of 2024, mainly because I really enjoyed the last trilogy, that being Rise, Dawn, and War for the Planet of the Apes that came out over the last decade or so. I have not seen the older ones. I still want to catch up on those, of course, because I know they're well renowned, but it seems like the general consensus is this last trilogy revived and rebooted the franchise in a way that paid homage to those original films while also doing its own thing. Although I was very excited to see this, I was also apprehensive because this movie had two huge pairs of shoes to fill, the first of which being those of Matt Reeves. Rupert Wyatt did a fine job with Rise of the Planet of the Apes back in 2011, but I think most people would say that the two best entries in the last trilogy were Dawn and War, which were both directed magnificently by Matt Reeves. Stepping into the directing chair this time is Wes Ball, who is most well known for directing the Maze Runner trilogy, and while those films, narratively speaking, were very messy, I thought the action was very well shot, so I was excited to see what he could do in another franchise that maybe has a little bit more creativity in the writing department. The other big pair of shoes that needed to be filled in Kingdom is that of Andy Serkis as Caesar, perhaps the greatest motion capture character of all time. I don't think people realize how much of these apes' personality is brought to life through the performer. If you go and watch the behind the scenes stuff, yeah, they're wearing these fully suits that are going to be digitalized, but the facial expressions are all belonging to the actors and are being translated over to these computer generated characters. This installment is set 300 years after Caesar's death. We follow a new ape character named Noah, played by Owen Teague. The world is now in full-on dystopia. Apes live in their own individual factions and are the dominant creatures on Earth. Humans, on the other hand, have gone completely primitive, even to the point of lacking the ability of speech. However, after a disaster strikes Noah's home, he embarks on a journey that leads to the discovery of a human named May, who seems to have more intelligence than the rest of her species. I haven't seen the old films, but from my understanding, this last trilogy was kind of a prequel companion to those older films. This is kind of going full-on dystopia now, to the point that apes have kind of become what humans were in the previous world, and now humans have become the apes. They've devolved. And although Caesar is now gone, and that was a big concern of mine going into this, there are likable characters to replace him, but I want to make it clear that you still feel his legacy throughout this movie. I mean, he's mentioned constantly, but not in a, nostalgic sort of way where they're trying to rely on his character, but it's more of considering how his teachings and his actions have led to these different factions of apes. For instance, the villain of this film, Proximus Caesar, if you couldn't tell by his name, has taken on some of Caesar's teachings, but he's distorted them and now uses them to justify not only violence against humans, but other apes as well. It's sort of like a commentary on the fact that higher consciousness will always lead to division and conflict. But what's fascinating is that there are other apes out there that don't even really know who Caesar was because they've just never been surrounded by other apes who carry on his culture. My favorite character in this is probably the orangutan. It's always the orangutans that I fall in love with. Raka, played by Peter Macon, who's sort of a scholar that Noah meets. And he has a very different agenda in that he's trying to spread the truth behind Caesar's story and keep his legacy alive, whereas others seem to be distorting it. As for Noah as our protagonist, I do like him. His motive throughout most of the film is kind of generic in that he mainly just wants to impress his parents. He's at this stage in his life where he's coming of age, and in his homeland, apes have a very specific culture. This particular subgroup is involved in domesticating eagles and using them to fish and do various other things for them. Noah has a very simple story arc, and it's nowhere near the level of what we got with Caesar, but it's sufficient, and you can't say that it copies that. But again, it is easy to sympathize with him and get behind him because you can tell he's good-hearted, despite the fact that he's been told his whole life that humans are bad. When human characters eventually do enter the fray, it's interesting to see how these different characters, the ape characters, react. Most of my big issues with this movie come along in the third act. I'll give it this, there's a situation that arises that made me sit back and genuinely question which side I was on in this argument between a couple of characters regarding humans and apes coexisting. However, this situation also raises so many questions as to how certain things came to be in the past, and I doubt they will ever be answered even if they do make another one. And even if they do, it's just very obvious that a lot of things in this are existing solely for the sake of setup to create the foundation for another trilogy, which isn't inherently bad, but I do get a sense that they were scared to fully commit to some things in Kingdom, and because of that, a lot of these interesting ideas come off as half-baked. I should also mention that the first 30 minutes had me a little bit worried. The pacing was very slow, and I didn't feel that level of investment yet. Once they start introducing more characters like our villain, Proximus Caesar, and this human character, May, it gets a lot more interesting. It just took a while to get there, and this is 2 hours and 20 minutes long. Lots of scenic shots of apes on horseback striding through overgrown cities with vines winding around all kinds of human structures, which is cool, but I think it lingers on those shots longer than it needs to. It's absolutely not boring though, and I think a big takeaway from this is that I am intrigued to see what they would do with another film if they were to make a sequel to this. So even though Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes feels a little bit incomplete in that it has a lot of half-baked ideas and it ends in a place that feels very much like we just want to have another one, so we're going to give you this intriguing setup. I enjoyed the characters, and it's honestly always going to be a pleasure to dive into this world, to look at these magnificent visual effects. I mean, I think the budget was like $160 million. Disney has made so many films that are like double that budget and look far worse. I mean, it looks incredible. I saw it on IMAX. That's definitely the way to go if you're interested in seeing it on a massive screen. I'm going to give Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes 3.5 stars. It really does come close to a 4, it does, but there were just a few too many flaws that hold it back from being as great as I wanted it to be. And it is probably my least favorite of this new run of Apes films, but I suppose it's a testament to this franchise to say that I still very much enjoyed this one. So those are my thoughts on Kingdom. I don't feel like saying the whole title again. As always though, I implore you guys to drop down into the comments and let me know your thoughts on the film, and be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll catch you all in the next one. See you later.